Welcome to Precedent, setting a news precedent. Between fight and flight, there is a line. That line is peace. That line we draw today defines some aspects involved in peace building, conflict resolution, and violence prevention in these troubled times, when there is fear, uncertainty, and doubt about where we stand in today's world, who we stand next to, and what we stand up for. We explore community outcry from hate crimes, prejudice, discrimination, abuse of authority, and much more. As the Civil Rights Act of 1964 approaches its 50th anniversary, we look at how it has affected America's divide regarding race, color, and national origin. And then we fast forward to 2009, Hate Crimes Prevention Act, expanding to gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, and disability. Today is October 7th, 2011, and the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to 3 women for their remarkable work in organizing peace and the peace movement to an end in the Second Liberian Civil War in 2003. One of them, Lema Kabawi, earned her master's degree in conflict transformation from Eastern Mennonite Center for Justice and Peacebuilding in 2007. Dr. Richard E. Rubenstein is a university professor of conflict resolution and public affairs at the George Mason University, holding degrees from Harvard, Oxford, as a Rhodes Scholar, as well as the School of Law. After our public service announcement break, we'll come back and speak with him.
Getting closer to nature can get you closer to your family. Go to discovertheforest.org.
A former lawyer, political scientist, and director of SCAR, that's a School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution, Dr. Rubenstein is the author of 8 books about various crimes, various types of violent social conflict, and possibilities of resolving them nonviolently. Dr. Rubenstein teaches graduate and undergraduate courses in conflict theory, speaks publicly on issues of peace and social justice. He's the author of Reasons to Kill, Why Americans Choose War, and blogs at reasonstokill.com. Dr. Rubenstein, thank you, sir, for being here today.
A great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Can you give us a brief definition, sir, on conflict resolution?
Yeah, conflict resolution means identifying the underlying causes of serious social conflict and doing something about them. Discovering how basic causes of conflict can be mitigated or eliminated, which is a challenging business. Conflict resolution really operates at a lot of different levels, but the level that my institution, SCAR, is most interested in is the level at which conflict is being generated by systems that are failing or malfunctioning, or in some cases that don't exist at all, and trying to find out what it takes to reconstruct a system that's producing violence or producing poverty, that's producing situations that deny people the satisfaction of their basic needs. Conflict resolution is really, I think, about finding better ways to satisfy basic human needs so that people won't feel the necessity to act antisocially or in a self-destructive way.
Dr. Rubenstein, how did you get started in the field?
Well, I started out as a lawyer, a Washington lawyer. And that taught me that if you're interested in helping resolve social problems, you really can't do it very efficiently by means of applying rules, especially if the problems involve basic human needs. So then I became a political scientist, and I taught political science in Chicago for a number of years and got involved with the anti-war movement in Chicago, too. And there I discovered that you can't solve basic social problems by applying power alone. To deal with these problems on the level of basic human needs and to help figure out imaginative new ways of solving them is really what conflict resolution does. So when I learned that George Mason University was expanding its Center for Conflict Resolution, and it already had some wonderful teachers and students there, I came over and fell in love with the field and the place.
Dr. Rubenstein, what are some of the challenges that you face in your field?
Well, there are a number of challenges in the field. There are intellectual challenges, of course, really trying to develop better means of understanding serious social conflict. That's a great challenge because if we look at most of the fields of study that exist, like economics, for example, economics assumes a certain kind of, a certain sort of person, the economic man, and a certain set of givens that really don't fit you very well to solve problems like the economic problems we're having right now, which are systemic, which are taking place on a system basis. And if you think about people as being basically little calculating machines that calculate costs and benefits and act on that basis, which is a kind of the economic, one of the economic models, people really aren't like that. I mean, they don't do that all the time. And so it makes it difficult for you to solve problems that involve the economy. Same thing can be said about society. You have various ideas about social and political person that come from an earlier stage of human development where people were naturally they seem to be naturally very competitive, for example. Or the opposite, they seem to be very malleable. No matter, they buy anything you wanted to sell them. We're finding more and more that if you want to understand how people operate in conflict, the idea that they're either very, very malleable or naturally aggressive and competitive doesn't get you very far. You need a more complex and realistic view of what makes people tick. So those are the intellectual challenges in the field that are continuing. There are also political and financial challenges in the field. One of the great challenges at the moment is to maintain the kind of independence that's needed for you to be both intellectually independent, so you're actually thinking your own thoughts and not thoughts somebody else is feeding you, and politically independent so that you can function as mediators or facilitators of serious social conflicts without being considered a tool of any government, including the U.S. government. So,
and that's maintaining neutrality?
That's maintaining a kind of neutrality. You know, none of us are neutral when it comes to justice and injustice and that sort of thing. But, so I prefer the word independence, really, to neutrality, but to be independent so that nobody's paying our bills. So that if we want to go to the Middle East, or, I mean, I have my colleagues practice as well as theorize. We all try to practice and theorize both. And so if we want to go to either the Middle East or go to I have my colleagues are working in the Caucasus now with Georgia and Ossetia and all of that. I have colleagues working in Indonesia, which is a very stormy social situation, in India and Pakistan, etc. For us to be labeled as a tool of the U.S. government would kill us in doing that work. For us to be labeled as the tool of any government or any existing social movement even, would mean people couldn't trust us to function as honest facilitators. So now it's very hard to maintain that independence in a day and age when, to some extent, foundation funding for our field has not been as generous as we would like, and there's more and more of a tendency to rely on Uncle Sam to supply research money and jobs and so forth for people. We're very grateful for that when we can do it while maintaining our independence. But we don't want to do it in such a way that we could be rightfully accused of being partisan and not being able to speak our minds. So I think that's a major problem in the field right now. But the opposite side of that coin is that when we can function independently, both intellectually and politically and financially independently, then wonderful things happen. I mean, the Northern Ireland conflict would never have been settled, in my opinion, if it hadn't been for 10 years of work in Northern Ireland by conflict resolution specialists that preceded George Mitchell's going over there and negotiating the Good Friday Agreement in 1990, was it 93, 94, For 10 years before that, I was involved in a couple of these meetings. People were going to Northern Ireland and dealing with the Catholic and Protestant parties and winning their trust, not in order to sell them a peace plan, by the way, but their trust so that they could open up and engage in an analytical process and trust each other enough to do that. That would never have happened if they had been identified with the Southern Irish, with the English, and the British, or with the US. So the fact that that work was done and people had learned to talk to each other about these issues, and it gone a long way in identifying what the basic issues were, and gone a long way in understanding that that an independent Northern Ireland was possible, that they didn't necessarily have to rely on either the British or the Southern Irish. That really laid the basis for the settlement in Northern Ireland. And we can look around the world and see several other, major victories for the field, almost always based on maintaining this kind of independence and freedom. Yeah.
So a key component of that, if I understand correctly, is also identifying that the two different parties, if you will, discover that they have more in common than they have in difference of opinion, if you will.
Well, that's certainly part of that's one of the things that can happen. Some people call that the common ground approach. And there's a wonderful organization you probably know in Washington called Search for Common Ground that operates on that basis. But there are also other theoretical perspectives. I mean, you can sometimes help people to make peace on the basis of their identifying each other's understanding what the basic needs are that aren't being fulfilled, and trying to figure out how the existing system can be changed to satisfy those needs.
So some of these are the basic fundamentals in conflict resolution. What would some of the cutting edge issues be, or approaches?
Well, some of the cutting edge issues and approaches involve, I'll just name a few. One of them involves what to do about conflicts that are structural, in the sense that they're taking place because there's something fundamental in the social structure or the economic structure that's not working. For example, if we want to try to eliminate cops and robbers in a country like the United States, where a couple of million people are imprisoned, where there's a major social conflict going on, even though it's sometimes not recognized as that, you can't do it unless you can also deal with a system that is systematically producing unemployment and poverty.
That would be a cause and effect?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a growing, we've had a number of presidential commissions that have stated that there is a cause and effect relationship. So that's really not the issue. The issue is, what do you do about it? Once you know it's structural, you're not going to have a violent revolution, you're not going to have business as usual. How do you do a system restructuring that doesn't get a lot of people killed and that's actually effective?
One final question for you, Dr. Rubenstein. What would be the future of the culture of conflict resolution with some of what you've mentioned?
Well, to kind of stretch my answer out a little bit to the previous question, I can tell you that in addition to these structural issues that I mentioned, people have gotten very interested in what you might call the psycho-spiritual aspects of conflict, and how people who have been at each other's throats for years, in some cases centuries, can reconcile with each other. That may involve the use of religious resources, and several of my colleagues are very interested in doing that, in working with religious leaders to help people reconcile after bitter and very, very violent conflict. Another kind of cutting-edge area has to do with storytelling in conflict, the role of narrative in conflict. Because one of the things we discover is that as people go into conflict, the stories that they tell, not only the content of the stories, but even the style of the stories, the kind of stories they tell, takes on certain characteristics. The narratives become thin and kind of impoverished and oversimple. And it gives rise to stereotyping, and gives rise to we, us, them, kind of vicious us, them thinking. So a number of my colleagues are in the forefront of trying to find out kind of what are the laws of narrative and conflict. Is there such a thing as narrative mediation that might help people tell different kinds of stories about and reconstruct their relationship based on a change in the way they're using language and also a change in the kinds of stories they tell about themselves and about the other party. Thus, it's a very exciting field because there are a number of issues like that that are just emerging but look very productive, look very promising.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you, Dr. Rubenstein. It's very enlightening, and we're grateful to have you here. I certainly appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
And when we come back from our next PSA, we'll be speaking with Dr. Cheryl Lynn Duckworth from Nova Southeastern University.